At 3:16 in the morning on October the 25th, 1944, a radar operator aboard the USS West Virginia picked up a contact 42,000 yards away, more than 23 nautical miles out, in water so dark her own lookouts could not have seen the horizon itself, let alone an enemy ship approaching it through a tropical strait already thick with the smoke of an earlier destroyer engagement. The West Virginia tracked that contact for the next 37 minutes without ever once laying eyes on it, calculated a complete firing solution while the target was still 30,000 yards away, well beyond the range at which the human eye could distinguish anything at all against a moonless sky, and did not actually fire a single shell until the range had closed to 22,800 yards, at which point her first salvo struck the leading Japanese battleship directly. This is the story of the Battle of Surigao Strait, the last battleship on battleship engagement in the entire history of naval warfare, and the specific reason a ship the Japanese Navy had already sunk once at Pearl Harbor, less than 3 years earlier, was the exact ship that actually sank the Japanese battleship Yamashiro in the dark using technology that same earlier attack had made absolutely necessary. Every week, we take apart a moment when a war turned, the technology that decided it, and the razor-thin margin between disaster and victory. Subscribe if that is the kind of history you want more of. The West Virginia had been sitting on the bottom of Pearl Harbor's own shallow water on December the 7th, 1941, struck by at least 7 torpedoes and 2 bombs during the Japanese attack that opened the entire Pacific War. One of the specific battleships whose own burning, sunken hull became the defining image of that single morning's catastrophe, broadcast to a genuinely shocked American public within hours. The Navy raised her, rebuilt her almost entirely from the waterline up across a reconstruction that took years rather than months, and returned her to active service in 1944, carrying something her original 1920s construction had never included, a genuinely modern Mark 8 fire control radar system developed specifically to solve the exact problem that had made her own crew's response to the Pearl Harbor attack so difficult, finding and hitting a target under conditions where human eyesight alone simply was not enough to actually locate an approaching threat in time. Before we get into exactly how that specific piece of equipment actually decided the battle before either fleet could even properly see the other, if you are finding this useful, hit subscribe. It costs nothing and it helps the channel keep telling these stories. Rear Admiral Jesse Oldendorf positioned 6 American battleships across the mouth of the Surigao Strait, specifically to intercept a Japanese naval force under Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura, attempting to reach the invasion fleet supporting American landings at Leyte, a classic naval maneuver historians call crossing the T, positioning ships broadside across an enemy column's own approach so that every gun on the defending line could bear on the enemy while only the lead enemy ship could actually fire back with anything resembling its own full weight of fire. Only 3 of Oldendorf's own 6 battleships, West Virginia, Tennessee, and California, had actually been fitted with the newer Mark 8 radar system during their own respective wartime reconstructions and upgrades. The remaining 3, Maryland, Mississippi, and Pennsylvania, still relied on the older, considerably less capable Mark III, a genuine technology gap within the very same American battle line that would prove decisive to exactly which ships actually did the fighting that night, regardless of how identical all 6 vessels might have appeared to anyone simply looking at their own outward silhouettes. Pennsylvania, despite having a clear tactical position throughout the entire engagement and a considerable amount of unobstructed line of sight to the enemy formation, never managed to locate a usable target on her own older radar and did not fire a single shot during the entire battle, a genuinely striking outcome for a battleship present at one of the most consequential naval engagements of the entire war. Yamashiro, the lead Japanese battleship in Nishimura's own column, carried no fire control radar of any kind whatsoever, a genuinely fatal technological gap the ship's own crew had no way to actually close. Once the engagement began in earnest, Japanese lookouts continued firing at visible targets using traditional optical methods throughout the entire fight, methods that had served naval gunnery for generations and that had genuinely proven themselves in earlier engagements, fought under considerably more even technological conditions, but that simply could not function in conditions this dark against an enemy already tracking her. by radar from a distance, her own crew could not even begin to estimate visually with any real confidence. Commander Nishimura's own last message that night, sent to his second battleship Fuso, asking her to increase speed, went unanswered, since Fuso had already been struck by American destroyer-launched torpedoes and had broken cleanly in two, a loss Nishimura himself never actually learned about before his own flagship met a remarkably similar fate only minutes later. The Mark 8 system's own genuine advantage over the older Mark III came down to the specific quality and clarity of the image it actually produced for the sailors operating it, not simply a longer maximum range on paper. The Mark 8 delivered a considerably harder, more precisely defined return than its own predecessor, distinguishing an actual warship's own hull from the softer, less consistent returns produced by shell splashes, wave action, or other battlefield clutter that routinely confused the older system's own operators during exactly the kind of chaotic, multi-ship engagement Surigao Strait actually became once the shooting started. That clarity meant West Virginia, Tennessee, and California could maintain a genuine continuous lock on Yamashiro throughout the engagement, regardless of how the Japanese battleship's own changing angle relative to the American line affected what a human eye alone might have been able to actually distinguish. While the three older Mark III-equipped battleships struggled with exactly the kind of screen clutter and target confusion the newer system had been specifically engineered to eliminate. West Virginia opened fire at 3:53 that morning, her 8 16-inch guns firing 93 rounds of armor-piercing shells across 16 separate salvos, nearly half of all the heavy armor-piercing ammunition the entire American battle line expended during the whole engagement that night. Tennessee and California opened fire moments later, and the three Mark 8 radar-equipped battleships together accounted for the overwhelming majority of the accurate, sustained fire that actually found the Japanese formation, their own radar systems maintaining a genuine, unbroken lock on Yamashiro throughout the engagement regardless of shifting target angles, cruiser silhouettes crossing the line of sight, or the general chaos of a rapidly evolving naval battle unfolding almost entirely in total darkness. Maryland eventually managed to locate Yamashiro using an entirely improvised method, ranging her own guns not off her own radar but off the visible shell splashes from West Virginia's fire landing nearby, a workaround that let her contribute 48 rounds of her own across 6 separate salvos, but that also illustrates just how completely the older Mark III radar had actually failed the three battleships still relying on it that night, forcing at least one of them to essentially borrow another ship's own targeting success rather than achieve one independently. Mississippi managed only a single salvo fired at the very end of the engagement, and Pennsylvania's own radar never located a usable target at all across the entire battle, despite genuinely favorable positioning. Yamashiro sank in less than 30 minutes from the moment West Virginia had first opened fire, struck by a combination of 16-inch and 14-inch armor-piercing shells alongside additional torpedo hits from the same American destroyer screen that had already crippled Fuso earlier that same night in an entirely separate phase of the same running battle through the strait. Mississippi fired the battle line's own final salvo at 4:08 that morning, a shot one naval historian later described as less a tactical necessity than a funeral salute to an entire era of naval warfare actually ending in that exact moment, since no fleet anywhere in the world would ever again fight a battle line action between opposing battleships the way naval powers had fought for the preceding 4 centuries of continuous maritime warfare stretching back through the age of sail itself. Only one significant Japanese warship actually survived Surigao Strait, relatively intact, the destroyer Shigure, which had trailed behind Nishimura's main column throughout the engagement and managed to reverse course and escape the strait entirely once it became clear the battle had already been decisively lost. Shigure's own survival became something of a grim post-war joke among Japanese naval veterans, the destroyer having already survived several other major engagements earlier in the war under circumstances that struck many of her own crew as genuinely improbable, a single ship's own recurring good fortune standing in stark contrast to the near-total destruction visited on every other vessel actually present in Nishimura's own doomed column that same night. This is not a story about American gunnery simply outmatching Japanese gunnery through raw skill or courage alone, since Japanese naval gunners had genuinely earned a formidable reputation across the earlier years of the same war, fought under considerably more even technological conditions on both sides of the Pacific. It is a story about how completely a single specific piece of equipment, a radar system good enough to track, range, and target an enemy ship that could not see its own attacker at all, could decide a battle between 6 battleships and 2 before the 2 fleets had ever actually come close enough for the older, purely visual style of naval combat to matter at all in any meaningful sense, rendering centuries of accumulated naval gunnery tradition essentially irrelevant against an enemy equipped with the right instrument at the right moment. 5 of the 6 American battleships present that night at Pearl Harbor had themselves been sunk or seriously damaged at Pearl Harbor less than 3 years earlier, meaning the same Japanese attack that had once put West Virginia on the harbor floor had, without ever intending to, helped force the specific reconstruction and technological upgrade that let her own crew sink a Japanese battleship in the dark using equipment that attack had made absolutely necessary in the first place. That coincidence extended across the entire American battle line that night. Ships that had once burned and sunk at their own moorings now standing together across the mouth of a strait on the opposite side of the Pacific, rebuilt, rearmed, and equipped with technology their own original 1920s construction could never have anticipated, delivering exactly the kind of decisive, overwhelming fire their own crews had been powerless to deliver back at Pearl Harbor itself. The symbolism was not lost on the sailors who had actually served aboard these same ships through both events, several of whom had personally survived the original Pearl Harbor attack and now found themselves crewing the same vessels during a night that many later described in post-war accounts as feeling like a debt finally being repaid in full. The West Virginia went on to serve through Mindoro, Lingayen Gulf, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, following the victory at Surigao Strait, using her own heavy guns repeatedly as floating artillery in support of American ground forces fighting their own considerably longer, considerably bloodier campaigns across each of those same islands. A kamikaze aircraft struck her own superstructure on April 1, 1945 during the opening days of the Okinawa campaign, killing 4 sailors outright, but the ship's own damage control teams contained the resulting fire quickly enough that West Virginia resumed gunfire support operations within a remarkably short period rather than requiring any extended withdrawal for repairs. She was present in Tokyo Bay when Japan formally surrendered the following September, a ship that had gone from the bottom of Pearl Harbor to the deck of ultimate victory in less than 4 years. A journey few observers watching her burning hull in December of 1941 could have realistically predicted for a battleship many had assumed was finished entirely. Surigao Strait itself represented only one piece of an enormously larger naval engagement, the Battle of Leyte Gulf, generally considered the largest naval battle of the entire Second World War and, by some measures, the largest naval battle in the entire history of naval warfare up to that point. Japan's own overall plan divided its remaining fleet into 3 separate forces, converging on the American invasion fleet from 3 entirely different directions simultaneously, a genuinely ambitious strategy that depended on precise coordination between forces separated by hundreds of miles of open ocean and operating under strict radio silence that made real-time coordination nearly impossible in practice. Nishimura's own southern force, the one actually destroyed at Surigao Strait, was meant to arrive in coordination with a second Japanese force under Vice Admiral Kiyohide Shima, but Shima's own ships remained nearly 30 miles behind Nishimura's column throughout the entire approach, arriving at the strait only after Yamashiro had already sunk and Nishimura's own force had already been effectively destroyed, a coordination failure that meant Shima's own considerable additional firepower never actually joined the fight at all before he made the decision to withdraw rather than continue into a battle already lost. If you want more stories about the technology that decided a battle before either side could actually see it happening, subscribe and we will keep finding them. See you in the next one.